Thanks for stopping by the channel. Make sure you're subscribed. Check out the bell icon. Make sure you get notifications. I want to talk about something that comes up a lot in conversations that I have with people at rallies and speaking events, and even in a conversation that I had with acquaintance slash new friend, growing friend the other day. And it's this idea of a constitutional sheriff. I think that too many people today have taken a page from the sovereign citizen movement, and they hear some things from the sovereign citizens that they really like, things that they think sound powerful, and then they try to apply that in a more reasonable, more intellectual way. So here's what I mean. First of all, if you're not familiar with the sovereign citizens, if you would like to kill about 17 hours of laughing or with laughing, go check out any sovereign citizen videos that you can find on YouTube, because I tell you, you will laugh so hard that it'll hurt, and then you'll cry so hard that you'll have to laugh. The vast majority of the people that you see posting their own videos as sovereign citizens on YouTube are utterly moronic and entertaining. I don't know how else to say it. Now, there are some pretty erudite people within the sovereign citizen movement, but they are not a people to be lauded. They're not a people to be hailed. They're not a people to be looked to for an example of how to conduct yourselves with law enforcement. They are not a group of people to be looked to on how to conduct yourselves in the courtroom. They are not a group of people to look to for advice on how to pretty much handle any aspect of your life. When your response to getting pulled over and getting asked for your driver's license and your registration and is to say to the officer that's pulling you over, I don't need a license to drive because I'm not driving, I'm traveling, and that's my constitutional right, you're a moron. So anyway, that aside, there within the sovereign citizen movement, there is this, and you see it a little bit too from the Posse Comitatus folks. There is this belief that the sheriff is at the zenith of power in a state, and that nobody has more power than the sheriff because the sheriff is the only constitutional office that there is. And as somebody that I spoke with recently said, like, well, you'll never be able to show me the words "the sheriff" in the Constitution of the United States, and that's very, very true. But is the concept of a constitutional sheriff utterly foreign to the United States? No, it's not. Now, the sheriff does not show up in the Constitution, and the sheriff is not what the sovereign citizen movement would make him out to be, him or her, excuse me, or they. They? Do I have to list all of the pronouns that are being used? Z, them, zer, zip, zit. I don't. Do I have to use all the pronouns that are like approved for usage today? Can I say it? I don't know. But anyway, the position of sheriff, when I refer to the sheriff as a or a sheriff or an individual sheriff or whoever it might be, as a constitutional sheriff or a not constitutional sheriff, it is a direct reference to the oath that a sheriff must take and to serve once he's elected. And that's where the constitutionality of the sheriff comes in. It's that they're elected directly by the people. They're not appointed. They're not put in place as representatives of a particular governing body. So a chief of police is appointed sometimes by the mayor, sometimes by the city council, sometimes by the two, not elected. Everybody should know that. That's why it's a police department and not a police office. It's a department because it's a department of a jurisdiction. A sheriff's office is just that. The sheriff is elected, and so he's constitutionally appointed by people who choose him as their representative in law enforcement. Now, a further addendum to what it means for a sheriff to be a constitutional sheriff is there are sheriffs that get elected who immediately upon taking office abandon their oath. And we've been seeing this in some jurisdictions since the first quarter to the first quarter of 2020. We've seen it other times. They allow the power to go to their heads, and they begin to use what authority that they have to protect their friends and harass others. That's a violation of the Constitution. There are others who there was a case that Sheriff Mack talked about a friend of his who stood up to the federal government, much like Sheriff Mack did, but refused to allow the federal government to bulldoze private property of people and said, this is my jurisdiction, and you are not going to do this without warrant and without following the proper procedures. And they literally threatened to arrest him on the spot. And that sheriff stood up and said, no, constitutionally, you have no legal authority to arrest me. I have done nothing illegal other than refuse to allow you passage. And when they interacted in that threat to arrest them, he said, I'll call my deputies and we'll proceed then. However you want to do this, we will proceed. And they got out of his way because he had a spine. He stood up and said, no, what you're doing is unconstitutional and therefore it's unlawful, and you're not going to do this. It's the same with the sheriff who protected some people in another case. I think it was in Nevada. And he said, I'm not going to allow you to go run roughshod over these people and take their property, take their land, take their livestock. And he interposed his deputies between his citizens, the people who elected him, and unappointed officials in the federal government. And so, here's why things like this are incredibly important. A sheriff is not subservient to any member of the federal government. Sheriff doesn't answer to the president. Sheriff doesn't answer to the vice president. The sheriff doesn't answer to the attorney general of the United States. The sheriff does not answer to the Department of Justice. He doesn't answer to the Supreme Court. And, now obviously he can go to court over things. He can be taken to court over things. But the sheriff does not answer to a particular group. The FBI does not have jurisdictional authority over the sheriff. The BATF does not have jurisdictional authority over the sheriff, which was the beginning of Sheriff Mack's case against the federal government. When the Brady bill was passed into law and became the Brady Act, the BATF moved into several jurisdictions all over the United States and told the sheriffs, you are now responsible for enforcing this, and if you don't, we're going to fine you and imprison you. Sheriff Mack, along with several other sheriffs across the United States, sued and said, you don't have that authority. You are not our superiors. We're not subservient to you. And they won. And so that's what being a constitutional sheriff is. And people, you got to be really careful with how you say things. Like, I know of people who have told their local sheriffs that they need to go out and arrest the governor. What? I mean, there are days I'd like to see that happen, but that's not the job of the sheriff. Like, there's a way for us to fight these things if we think that they're unconstitutional or unlawful. But telling a local sheriff he's just supposed to go show up in St. Paul at the governor's residence, the people's house, or at the governor's office at the Capitol, and you supposed to just walk in and arrest him? What's he supposed to do? He's supposed to bring in a bunch of his deputies, take him away from their jurisdiction, and drive up to St. Paul, or drive down to St. Paul, or over to St. Paul, or whatever it is, and just move on in and have a gunfight with the state patrol security detail? I mean, what kind of asinine thought process is that? Now, there again, you can disagree with what the governor's doing. You can disagree with that the governor has the authority to do the things that he's doing, but you can't just assert a principle that doesn't exist. And you know what? And there may come a time and a place in the future of the United States down the road where it becomes absolutely necessary for certain aspects of the law enforcement community to say, nope, enough's enough. You've gone this far, you'll go no further. Are we there yet? I think in some jurisdictions we might be. I think we might be. I think that if you look in places like New York, where they were literally threatening to seize the buildings of certain religious groups for having the audacity to follow the Constitution and follow their religious convictions and meet, despite the governor and the mayor ordering them not to, that would be a time where a sheriff would or should step in and say, no, you're not going to do this. But does that mean you arrest the governor, arrest the mayor? No, you protect the people. And I want people to, there again, I want people to understand, be careful what you assert and how you assert it. Because if you're just asserting something without any foundational, fundamental reality behind what you're saying, then you just sound like a crackpot. Okay? You just sound like a crackpot. And also, be careful that what you say that a sheriff has the power to do is accurate, because if that's what power the sheriff has and you want him to use it against someone that you oppose on a political level, or oppose because you find what they're doing to be wrong, then that same power can be brought against you by the powers that be. So be very, very, very careful how you word things and how you try and push something into a realm of functioning, if you would. Yes, the sheriff should be constitutional. Yes, they're constitutional in the sense that they're elected directly by people as a representative of the people when it comes to enforcing the laws and keeping the Constitution free from threats and assault from enemies, both foreign and domestic. And I add that into everything, because when you swear to uphold the Constitution, whether it be of the state or chiefly the United States, you do need to protect the Constitution from enemies, foreign and domestic, no matter what. That should be on your mind at all times. And you should be having it on your mind to not be an enemy of the Constitution. But do not create in your own mind some position that you think exists for the sheriff, as if he can march on Washington with his deputies and kick Biden out of office, or march on your state capitol and kick your lunatic Marxist governor out of the governor's mansion or the governor's office. That's just not within the purview of a sheriff. The sheriff is jurisdictional and he's regional. And while he might have the ability to enforce the laws of the state of Minnesota wherever he is, if it's a Minnesota issue, that's really not what he should be doing, outside of watching directly over the people within his jurisdiction. That is what makes him a constitutional sheriff, not you commanding him to go arrest the governor. So once again, people, be careful, be very, very careful, and make sure that what you're asserting is not a crackpot idea from the sovereign citizens or some other group that sounds like the sovereign citizens. And until next time, Sic Semper Tyrannis.